This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, an update from the markets. The indices at the JSE have been doing pretty well so far in the year, up 11.8 and 12.7% on the top 40 and the all share respectively. Gains of over 1% on both in today's session. Money majors did account for most of the drag on the all share this week, but today that certainly wasn't the case. Naspers and Capitec falling by 1.6% and 2.1%. respectively. In East Africa, Safaricom shares fell by the biggest margin in 12 months, falling by over 5% according to Bloomberg data in today's trading session. It did claw back some of those losses, but it closed 3.5% lower. Across the pond, Nvidia delivered some impressive first quarter results, 83% year-on-year improvement in revenue, net income up 20% quarter-on-quarter to $2.3 billion, but its share price, rather curiously, started the day 0.5% lower. We'll have the updates in a bit. In the meantime, here are your headlines. The eastern DR Congo's commercial hub of Goma faces imminent collapse as thousands flee a looming volcanic eruption. Hard-pressed by the impact of COVID-19, Ghanaians are opting for side businesses to cope with tough economic times. And a court in the Netherlands has ordered Royal Dutch Shell to cut its carbon emissions far more aggressively than originally planned. Quite a bit to get through, but let's start tonight in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Tens of thousands of people have fled the city of Goma. That's after authorities there issued an evacuation order warning that Mount Nyiragongo, which is just 10 kilometers from the city, could erupt again. Now, Goma is the commercial hub of the eastern DRC. The town is the epicenter of trade related to both small-scale traders and large-scale mining operations too. According to the UN, at least 32 people have died. Around 30,000 more have been forced to flee their homes when the volcano first erupted on the 22nd of May. Since then, the area has experienced a series of earthquakes and tremors, some that were felt as far as the Rwandan capital of Kigali, some 65 miles from the volcano in the Virunga National Park. Let's get an update on exactly what's happening in Goma. Chris Chamringa joins us from the DRC's capital with the latest developments. So, Chris, bring us up to speed with the latest on the evacuation process from Goma. Is the plan to empty the entire city? And if so, by when might that process be completed?
Well, Ramah, according to the authorities in Goma, the plan is to evacuate people who are living in 10 neighborhoods of Goma. These are areas that are densely populated and have been described as high-risk areas. There have been tremors and earthquakes, like you mentioned, that led to the collapse of some buildings in that area, and the experts from the Goma Volcano Observatory said that these are signs that there could be another eruption. So Goma has a total of 18 neighborhoods, so it's just 10 that have been affected, but people from other areas also are afraid, and so they've also started going. Like you mentioned, tens of thousands of people started the journey from Goma to Sake. Sake is an area in the western part of Goma, about 25 kilometers away, and there are very many people. We've seen videos of cars, people moving in cars and people walking on foot, and so there's a long line of people. It normally takes about 20 minutes to drive to that area, but it will take between 2 and 3 days because of the volume of people who are, the traffic that is going to the new place that they're supposed to be resettled.
Indeed. And of course, this is a massive logistical undertaking. What sort of help does the DRC government need at the moment to resettle people being evacuated out of Goma? Because that's a city of at least 1.5 million people.
The government certainly needs a lot of money. The officials from the Ministry of Health and other experts are in Goma right now. They are holed up in meetings trying to assess how much they need. They haven't told us exactly the amount, but they'll definitely need a lot of money to help people, set up shelters, food, water, treatment, medicine, and also they'll need experts to provide psychosocial support to these people who have been traumatized by the disaster that happened. We've spoken to some international humanitarian organizations who said they will stand with the DRC to provide water and other basic necessities. It's a very huge undertaking, like you mentioned, and the government is relying a lot on the support of the international community to be able to help these people who are going there. This is coming at a time when the country already is grappling with COVID-19 and other health emergencies like measles and monkeypox, and so the government doesn't have enough resources to help the people who have been affected by these disasters. So they will be getting support from the international community.
Indeed. One last question for you, Chris. So we know lava flows from Saturday's eruption. They came very, very close, I believe 300 meters or so from the runway at the airport in Goma. Is that facility fully operational at the moment, or is it too risky to be running flights in and out of Goma as things currently stand?
Yeah, it's still closed. The airport is closed because there have been clouds of ash that came from Mount Nyiragongo when it erupted on Saturday, and the experts there said that it's not, it can affect pilots who intend to land to that area, and also the lava that stopped near the airport is said to have some toxic gases, and so the experts, the volcano experts, said that it's not a good idea. They have to close that airport, and it's not only that airport that has been closed. There's another one in the neighboring city of Bukavu which has also been closed. So this has complicated the relief effort, because there's some humanitarian organizations that have been relying on supplies from different parts of Congo, which cannot immediately get the supplies through around the country. They have to fly to Rwanda and then bring it in, and with the COVID-19 restrictions, it will delay the whole response, and so this has complicated the response effort for people. But the experts, the Congolese experts, are saying that it's for a good reason, and they will have to keep it closed until they decide that it's safe to open it.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Chris Ochamringa there live from Kinshasa in the DRC. Now, the UN mission in the DR Congo is also relocating its staff from the city of Goma. These are some of the views on the ongoing process.
There are many earthquakes which are linked to this volcanic phenomenon, but which continue, and which make volcanologists not completely rule out that there may be either even more earthquakes, or even a second volcanic event, or even a second rush. We have a large presence of United Nations agencies. We have more than 2,500 people in the city of Goma, and therefore it is our obligation to our staff and to the families of our staff to distinguish those which are essential, critical for emergency response, and coordination of what are not. In any case, we are not going to work in these conditions, so we are in the process of relocating the personnel to help them find safety conditions for a period until the volcanic event can be declared over.
There are a lot of quakes. Many people are going to die. That's why people are being told to leave the city of Goma.
I'm going to Sake, which is 27 kilometers away, and I'll get there on foot. I am running away from the Nyiragongo volcano. I have 5 children. I suffer. I don't know what we will eat there. I can't locate my husband since the last eruption.
All right, then let's try and get an understanding of exactly what's going on in the geology around Mount Nyiragongo, Goma, and of course Lake Kivu, which is pretty much next door. Robin George Andrews is a volcanologist who joins us now live from London with more analysis on this event. Robin, let me start with something that I keep coming across every time I read about Lake Kivu and the volcanic activity around it. What is a limnic eruption, and why is this a serious risk when it comes to Lake Kivu and the recent eruptions of Mount Nyiragongo?
So limnic eruptions are they're quite strange things. There are only a few historical examples, but they don't sort of directly involve the volcano. Essentially, because of the volcanism in the region, which is quite unique, the magma often brings up a lot of carbon dioxide, and its reactions to the rocks create a lot of methane. Now, these two gases are not great to be around if you're a person. I mean, carbon dioxide, for example, is odorless, invisible, and denser than air. It pulls into low-lying depressions in the ground, so it can it's kind of a silent killer, and in the past in the wider region, it's known to have killed hundreds and thousands of people in some incidences in their sleep. A limnic eruption essentially is what happens when the gas that gets trapped in aquifers or in big lakes, and it gets trapped there for a variety of reasons, kind of gets unleashed. This can happen in a variety of ways. You could have like a violent underwater volcanic eruption. You have a big landslide, but if a lot of this gas is released, it kind of gets released in one big go, and that's what's called a limnic eruption. And you know, it's a difficult thing to predict, and basically in certain lakes like Lake Kivu, it's a constant threat. I mean, the lake has I think it's something like 300 cubic kilometers of carbon dioxide and about 60 cubic kilometers of methane dissolved in its waters, and you know, no one wants any proportion of that being sort of, you know, flooded out all at once.
Indeed, and of course the methane does add to this lingering risk, for lack of a better word, of it being ignited, given all the heat that a volcanic eruption does bring to the table, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's a kind of very complex situation at the moment as well, because you know, there are kind of two risks at the moment around Goma relating to Lake Kivu. So recent data that looks at the deformation of the ground has kind of shown that it looks like magma has kind of migrated near towards the lake. It's still kind of preliminary and, you know, it's still being pinned down, but I think it's that kind of underground migration of magma that's kind of sparked the recent kind of evacuation order. And the two dangers here is, yes, you could get some sort of limnic eruption if the magma forces its way to the surface in a vigorous manner under the lake. But also there's the danger of just the magma mixing with the water itself, and in certain conditions, and it has happened, you know, centuries ago, around the urbanized shores of Lake Kivu, you can just get explosive eruptions anyway. It's just the mingling of the magma and the water, regardless of the kind of methane and carbon dioxide that's there. That just kind of releases a lot of heat very violently in a way that can cause kind of unpredictable explosions. So yeah, it's a very complicated but very precarious situation.
Indeed. So for years now, there have been monitoring stations around the lake for both seismic activity, monitoring CO2, methane levels. Walk us through how these work and how that data then feeds through into decision-making by public authorities.
Yeah, so first off, the kind of seismic instruments that have kind of been around the area. So what seismicity does, what these earthquakes tell scientists, is kind of what exactly is happening underground. And it's kind of tricky because the kind of seismic network run by the Goma Volcano Observatory has kind of been built up over the years, and it has had some troubles. You know, there's been some of the seismic stations get sort of vandalized or broken down for parts, sort of thing. So it's quite a difficult thing to maintain. However, this was the first time that an expansive network of seismic instruments had been up and running during a Nyiragongo eruption. So it's provided very valuable data. The problem is, because it hasn't been up and running during a previous eruption, it's hard to know what that seismic data alone is kind of suggesting, which is why scientists have been using satellite data to look how the ground has changed shape, which kind of helps indicate where magma is moving in and out. So that's one way of monitoring things. The other is to have, like, as you say, these kind of gas monitoring stations. I don't know as much about how many of these stations there are. I do know that it's often quite difficult to monitor for carbon dioxide because carbon dioxide is not exactly a rare gas. Again, it's quite difficult to detect compared to other gases. There are efforts being made to look for this, but essentially what people can do is watch out for upticks in this. Like if you suddenly get an uptick in the amount of carbon dioxide, and certainly methane, which is not just normally hanging around, that's obviously a sign for worry. But it's a big lake and a very sprawling city, so you know, it's an unenviable task to try and actually monitor for all these different things at once. But everyone that is monitoring them is doing the best job they possibly can.
All right, then let me ask you a rather unenviable question, because this is about, given all the uncertainty that you pointed to, what data can local authorities look for to determine if Goma will ever be safe for long-term settlement again? Because Nyiragongo in its eruptions is somewhat unpredictable. Last time it blew up was 2002. Now it's blown up again in 2021. If we're going to try and figure out if people should actually be settling in Goma again, what data should you be looking for?
Well, yeah, it's a tricky question in the sense that I don't think anyone will ever stop people kind of settling in Goma. There's a powerful, whether or not you're living next to a more dangerous volcano or a less dangerous volcano, it's kind of the same as people living along the San Andreas Fault in San Francisco or Los Angeles. Like, these dangers are clear, present, and in some cases inevitable. There will be a big earthquake in California within the next 30 years, 100% chance of that. There will be, certainly more dangerous eruptions of Nyiragongo. This eruption didn't seem to have any precursors. This one did happen without warning. Usually volcanoes give some sign that they're about to erupt, or at least probably about to erupt. This one came as a surprise, even with the monitoring equipment. So it's difficult. The real danger, the two dangers really of Nyiragongo is it's very fast lava flows and go up to 40 miles an hour due to its weird chemistry in the steep slopes. And you have this kind of gas issue as well. So, one could argue that Goma is inherently always in danger of being kind of visited by volcanic violence. There's no real point in which that will go away. The 2002 eruption happened, and it was very devastating. But I think it destroyed a fifth of the entire city. But the population of Goma roughly doubled since then. I think once a city it would take an apocalyptic event to destroy all of the city. I think that's the only thing that stops people living in certain areas. But yeah, I think it's always going to be a danger. It's if you live in Goma, and millions of people call it home, there will always be this danger that the volcano will turn against them.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you for your input, Robin George Andrews, a volcanologist there in London. Now let's head over to Zambia. Headline inflation over there has gone up to an 18-year high in the month of May as the cost of meat and fish pushed up food prices. Consumer prices went up. This is now headline inflation in general terms, 23% compared to a year earlier. Compare that to 22.7% in the month of April. The data is coming from Zambia's statistician general. He's holding that post in an interim capacity. Costs increased 2% in the month. Annual food inflation quickened to 28.5% in May from 27.2% a month earlier. Inflation has been above the upper limit of the central bank's target range of between 6 to 8% for more than 2 years now. It's expected to stay there until at least the first quarter of 2023. Zambia Central Bank last week said that price growth pressures will ease faster and maybe earlier than anticipated, but the governor of the central bank, Christopher Mvunga, has warned that the Monetary Policy Committee may tighten rates further down the line if inflation doesn't decline rapidly. All right, then a quick run through some company news. Let's start with one of East Africa's largest banks, KCB. KCB Group's gross bad debt grew in the first quarter of the year to about $912 million. That's the highest level ever recorded by the lender. KCB's ratio of gross non-performing loans to gross loans was 14.8%. That's much higher than the bank's sector's average of 14.2%. The largest share of the bank's loans were personal loans, taking up 38.5% of the entire loan book. Loans to real estate and manufacturing came in second and third respectively, taking up 18.5% and 14.3% of the loan book. South Africa's Mr. Price said on Thursday it would pay a final dividend after full-year profit went up by nearly 2% on a strong second half. The budget clothing and homeware retailer reported a 64% rise in online sales in the 53 weeks ending on the 3rd of April. Online traffic went up 65%, with 86% of that traffic coming from mobile devices. The Mr. Price app also remained the top-ranked fashion shopping app in South Africa, according to Google app rankings. Airbus plans to ramp up production, and it says it sees a recovery to pre-pandemic levels of demand by 2025. The world's largest plane maker says it will increase output of its A320neo by more than 10%, from 40 aircraft a month to 45 by the end of this year. Airbus builds its wings in the United Kingdom. It also set a new target of 64 planes rolling off the production line a month by the second quarter of 2023. The move comes at a time when airlines are still struggling to remain financially viable. And finally, the French pharmaceutical giant Sanofi and the UK's GSK have announced the start of final tests of their COVID-19 vaccine. The companies reported positive results from interim human trials earlier this month. According to the two firms, enrollment for phase 3 of the clinical study will include more than 35,000 volunteers, all adults, at sites in the US, Asia, Africa and Latin America. That's a run through your company headlines. We're 20 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Hard-pressed by the economic impact of the pandemic, Ghanaians are opting for side businesses in order to survive. And EgyptAir is close to securing a $320 million facility to clear some existing debt.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Now, while the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted economic activities and caused enormous job losses around the world, in Ghana, many people have turned to their side businesses in order to stay afloat. As pandemic restrictions are gradually eased, business analysts say people can scale up the side hustles and make them more viable in the long run. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai takes up that story from Accra.
Priscilla Amano makes fruit juice from this kitchen and sells it to people. She started this business last year when the coronavirus pandemic led to lockdown restrictions in Ghana. The government's ban on travel also took a toll on her full-time job as a travel agent. She says this side business has helped her survive the pandemic.
I've been doing for events. I do gigs for weddings, funerals, baby christening, and people who want certain gallons for their homes. So it has helped me. Financially, it has been good, taking care of me through the hard times.
Priscilla says she was earning $800 a month before the pandemic. Now, she only makes about $350. Ghana's Statistical Service estimates that nearly 800,000 workers in Ghana had their wages slashed, while more than 40,000 lost their jobs last year due to COVID-19. The situation has forced many people in the country like Priscilla to start their own business. She says her startup capital was $100. Priscilla started by making 10 bottles of fruit juice daily when the pandemic hit last year. Now she produces 100 bottles in a week due to high demand. But she finds it difficult to keep the business going when some of the fruits are out of season.
There are times that you will not be able to get the supplies that you're looking for. Also, you buy the fruit, you get to the house, you start peeling and you realize it's spoiled. That's a loss to the business.
Business experts say there is a chance side hustles can be turned into more lucrative businesses and with the right support, become full-time jobs.
It sounds off when I say thank God for COVID, because it allowed people to look at the entrepreneurial side, and I hope that they just don't look at it as a phase, so that when the vaccines and we start wearing the mask, they can go back to the way they were. They should use this as an opportunity to then leverage on what it is that they're already doing and scale much better than they already are.
Priscilla Amonovi agrees. While she markets her fruit juice on social media to attract more buyers, she hopes to expand the business by distributing across the major cities in the country. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
On to North Africa. EgyptAir is expected to sign a definitive agreement with two lenders on a 10-year loan facility of about $320 million to pay off loans and aircraft leases. The Egyptian government will guarantee that facility in a move that's aimed at helping the national carrier to withstand the devastating impact of the pandemic. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has details from Cairo.
Like most airlines, EgyptAir has been suffering from the effects of the global COVID-related flight restrictions that have plummeted the aviation industry. The airline says it has so far lost nearly $600 million since March 2020, when the pandemic broke out. To avoid shutdown or cutting salaries, the airline received a $330 million interest-free loan from the government to sustain its operations. In the meantime, the state-owned air carrier has tapped into cargo as an alternative form of revenue.
EgyptAir's air freight activity has imposed itself as an important alternative to cover losses. All activities in aviation stopped due to the pandemic, with the exception of air freight, including transporting medical equipment, medicine and aid to many countries, including Egypt. This subsector saw a considerable increase of 50% compared to pre-coronavirus levels. The company has also had to cut down on expenditure without slashing any salaries, except 10% from the top management positions.
EgyptAir also worked on opening new routes, especially in southern and West Africa, the United States and the Far East, to supplement income. Although international flights are gradually resuming, operating losses have continued piling at about $40 million a month, prompting the airline to reach out for another $330 million loan from local banks that will be repaid over 10 years.
The state, thankfully, from the start of the crisis, provided £2 billion, that's approximately $130 million, to ensure salaries are paid on time and meet other monthly expenses. The other £3 billion, which is equivalent to $200 million from local banks, is being utilized for plane leases, maintenance and other fixed operational expenses.
The airline is also undergoing a restructuring process to cut costs by merging 9 affiliated companies into 3. With the rollout of vaccines worldwide and the gradual return of international flights, EgyptAir is targeting the second half of 2021 to be the beginning of its recovery period. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
On to South Africa. The continent's most industrialized economy wants its aviation sector to align with global trends, where visitors are required to produce a mobile travel pass. Now, that move is part of global efforts to digitize travel health certificates, partly to get tourism and aviation sectors moving once again, but also in order to deal with the growing threat of fake certification. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu exploring how South Africa plans to fully reopen to international air travel.
Currently, South Africa's paperwork is not guaranteed in all countries of travel, but the same could be said for other countries too. The International Air Transportation Association has introduced a mobile travel pass that's helping to prove legitimacy.
This particular initiative was successfully tested by Singapore Airlines and more than 20 carriers. We need to work with the industry to ensure that we place South Africa on a new growth path, making use of opportunities presented by technology and ensure that South Africa joins the growing number of countries that accept the IATA mobile travel pass.
For now, it's mostly business people traveling, but it's become tedious at the airports, having to social distance and produce test results. Queues become longer when documents are questioned.
I had a phone call from a friend this morning. He needs to travel because he's in the fruit export industry. When he does get vaccinated, he'll get a card, his name, ID, and the jab number. That's not verifiable. That's not good enough for you to travel. You need to take that results onto a digital wallet. If he's flying via Dubai to Singapore or something, and they want to see it and they want to check it, there needs to be this.
IATA took advantage of the rising need for speedy and legitimate COVID-19 test results last year by developing an Uber-like model to get blood results to customers as fast as possible.
You do need COVID tests in order to travel. Customers have these very tight deadlines in order to make it. Do I need a COVID result within 72 hours of leaving South Africa? within 48 hours of landing in Germany or the UK. All these things are changing all the time, so customers need to talk to people to understand, and we're constantly doing that as countries and airlines change those timelines or change those rules.
There's still over 60 countries with restrictions on travel from South Africa. Once this pass comes through, traveling abroad will be easier.
There is a digital record of people and their ID and the fact that they are getting vaccinated. So it's just for the government to make that last step to say, if you would like it into a digital wallet.
A digital travel pass on an app that will store all the relevant information will definitely make the process smoother and more efficient, especially for business people that travel frequently. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to North Africa. The ancient amphitheatre of El Jem is one of Tunisia's top tourist attractions. It's also among the largest and best preserved Roman amphitheatres in Africa. In the years since it was used for gladiatorial combat nearly a millennium ago, the theatre has attracted hundreds of thousands of visitors from all over the world. But ever since the COVID-19 pandemic hit, businesses at the Colosseum who depend on tourist traffic are having a rather difficult time staying in the ring. CGTN's Alexandre Majala has that story.
The El Jem Amphitheatre is a 3rd century structure so symbolic of Tunisia that it features on the 20 dinar note. The Colosseum usually receives about 190,000 visitors a year, but in 2020, only 45,000 came. So far, this year it has been deserted most of the time, a sign that another tourist season is wrecked by COVID-19.
Of course, there is a great impact on the tourism sector. Can you imagine a person will have to close his shop for a month or two? Where will the money come from? And the government is absent. All the sectors are affected by this pandemic, and the most affected is the tourism sector.
Over the past 2 weeks, numbers have picked up a little after the government relaxed quarantine rules for package tours. The move is meant to salvage some foreign revenue from the summer high season, but the numbers are nowhere near where they were pre-pandemic.
This is our first day today, official first day. So we did a COVID test and I was negative, as I expected. Mexico is very open, Tunisia is very open. Like, these are some of the top destinations right now that are extremely open. And so for us that was important. Like, I didn't want to wear a mask being in the resort. So that was quite an important factor. So it seemed pretty much like one of the perfect places to go at this moment.
Tunisia, which is dependent on foreign help to obtain COVID-19 vaccines, is struggling with low stocks. The country has been allocated 4.3 million doses to the COVAX scheme for poorer countries, but only 670,000 of them have arrived. It has also received some other doses through a separate agreement with Pfizer. As a result, only 800,000 people out of its population of 11.6 million have been vaccinated so far. This means there's little prospect of reducing infection rates enough to lure numbers of visitors away from rival European destinations.
Yeah, we have to do more efforts on government level. We have to accelerate this vaccination campaign with the higher speed than now. And things will be more faster if we encourage people to get vaccinated, and if we provide vaccines as well, which is the biggest issue for the moment now.
But in the meantime, shifting their target audience and lobbying locals to explore Tunisia has become priority. Most tourists come to Tunisia for its long white beaches, ruined Roman cities, cork forests, medieval mosques, Star Wars film sets, and Saharan oases. But short vaccine supplies hamper efforts to vaccinate workers in the service industry. Tourism normally accounts for about a tenth of the economy. Its collapse after militants attacked a beach and a museum in 2015 caused an economic crisis, but the sector had been recovering before COVID-19 hit. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
At 18:34 GMT, you're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. A court in the Netherlands orders Shell to cut its carbon emissions by far more aggressively than earlier planned. And African countries are deploying machine learning to map urbanization trends in cities. That story is coming up next.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Rwanda, the French President Emmanuel Macron has acknowledged his country's role in the 1994 Rwandan genocide. He sought forgiveness at a remembrance event in Kigali. For his first public stop, he visited the Genocide Memorial, where he said his country was complacent in the killings. The genocide has been a major sticking point between the two countries. President Paul Kagame has repeatedly accused France of aiding in the atrocities. On to the Democratic Republic of Congo. There are tens of thousands of people fleeing the city of Goma, as reported at the start of the hour. That comes after authorities issued an evacuation order warning that Mount Nyiragongo, which is just 10 kilometers from the city, could erupt again. Goma is the commercial hub in the eastern DRC. The town is the epicenter of trade related to both small and large-scale mining. In Somalia, Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble says he's committed to free and fair elections. On Thursday, he signed an agreement with regional presidents to allow for indirect elections. According to this deal, elections will be held within the next 60 days. Roble and the leaders of 5 other regional states will then select members of the election committee. Somalia had initially planned to hold its first direct election since 1969, but that was postponed after stakeholders failed to reach a consensus. And finally, 156 people are still missing in Nigeria's Kebbi state after a boat accident in Lake Kainji. Authorities at the National Inland Waterways of Nigeria say that the wooden boat was traveling from Niger State. It was overloaded while ferrying passengers to a local market. A rescue mission is underway. So far, 20 people have been rescued. 4 others, however, have been confirmed dead. Eyewitnesses say that the passengers on board were making their way to a market across the lake, across the lake and to a newly found gold mine. That's a run through your headlines. Now, barely 24 hours ago, a court in the Netherlands ordered Royal Dutch Shell to cut its carbon emissions by 45% by 2030, with its 2019 emissions as a baseline. And this is a ruling that has rippled through the world and commodities markets today. This landmark case was brought by climate activism groups, which hailed the decision as a victory for the planet. The Hague District Court ruled that the Anglo-Dutch energy giant has a duty of care to cut emissions regardless of what governments do. The judge in that particular case added that the firm's current emissions reductions plans were not concrete enough either. The decision could set a precedent for other similar cases against other multinationals with enormous emissions footprints around the world. Prior to this case, Royal Dutch Shell had committed to reducing the carbon intensity of its products by 20% by 2030 and 45% by 2035 compared to 2016 levels. It still maintains its plans to eliminate over 1.7 gigatons of CO2 emissions by 2050. All right, then let's see how this decision rippled through the markets today. Elena Casas joins us from London with more data on this story. So, Elena, the judgment tells Shell to cut emissions by 45%, saying the existing targets are not concrete. So, assuming this is held on appeal, how can Shell do this? Because one way of reading this is that it implies a reduction in capital expenditure by this oil company.
Yes,
Shell's CEO Ben van der Burden has said exactly that meeting the target that the court requires would only be possible by shrinking the size of the business. The company, as you were saying, already says it will reach net zero by 2050, but it's talking about cutting the carbon intensity of its products compared to 2016 levels. It says that its emissions peaked in 2018. Now, those numbers are the ones that were rejected by the court for not being concrete enough. That's because basing the targets on the intensity of the emissions could, in theory, allow the company to actually increase its overall output. So it will only be possible to comply with this if Shell significantly cuts its oil output. You might remember that the IEA already said last week that if governments around the world are serious about climate change, then there should be no new fossil fuel investments from this year on. Now, Shell was already promising to cut its oil production gradually by about 1 to 2% a year between now and 2050, but this ruling would require a pivot to renewable energy that would have to be much bigger, perhaps on the scale of that promised by BP, which already promised to cut 40% of its oil production by 2030 and ramp up its green energy investment to 25 gigawatts of capacity, which is about 2/3 of the peak power use here in Britain.
Indeed. So representatives of the firm said they're going to appeal against this ruling. They made that very, very clear yesterday. But do their lawyers think they have a really strong basis for an appeal?
Well, analysts say either way this is likely to drag on. There are likely to be at least 2 years of appeals and probably long, arduous court battles over this case, presuming Shell does choose to fight it all the way. But what's interesting really is that there are likely to be many other similar cases targeting other major oil companies. The ruling has set an interesting precedent for climate litigation. It's the first time a court has ruled that investment in fossil fuels violates the human rights of civilians, in this case 17,000 Dutch citizens who put their names on this lawsuit, and it's also the first time a judge has ordered that a corporation must comply with the Paris Agreement. So even if this particular ruling is eventually watered down, we're bound to hear a host of similar cases brought against other oil companies.
The interesting bit about this ruling, though, is the global ramifications it has for the firm, isn't it? Because it applies not just to Shell, but Shell plus its suppliers. So what sort of legal liability does it open up for the company outside of the Netherlands?
Well, as you say, the ruling is clear that it applies to all Shell's global output and possibly, even more interestingly, also to the output of customers using its products. So eventually, everyone who's bought Shell fuel and has put it in their cars, which is something that Shell's lawyers will be urgently seeking to clarify. It does seem that the days of big oil firms being opaque about how they're going to cut carbon emissions are over, and that they're all going to have to start thinking about how to incorporate customers' emissions into their own targets, because this ruling is just so far-reaching.
Indeed, and that, well, unfortunately at this point includes me and the fuel I have in my car at the moment. One last question for you, Elena. So the firm's shares down around 3.6% this week, but does this fundamentally change how investors view oil stocks, not just Royal Dutch Shell, but the likes of Chevron, ExxonMobil and BP?
Well, it's worth pointing out that those big oil firms vary enormously in how far they've already been willing to go in changing to adapt to climate change. BP, as I said, has moved more aggressively than most of the others to cut oil production, and it does seem to be seeing some reward for that in its share price. That's up about 8% in the last 3 months. Exxon is also up by about the same amount, and Exxon, of course, witnessed a boardroom coup from its own investors just last night when a small hedge fund, Engine No. 1, with the support of big investors, including BlackRock, elected 2 climate activists to its board. Now, Exxon fought that tooth and nail, but the expectation that it would be forced towards renewable energy has probably helped the share price, even if it's not what the managers wanted. The next one to watch out for is French firm Total, which holds its AGM tomorrow, and it could also face a shareholder revolt from its investors who think it's not doing enough. So really, there's a lot going on in boardrooms across big oil, where the people who own those shares are pointing out to the managers, to the CEOs, that they're only going to be investing if they see the companies adapting to this new reality.
Indeed, and it does lay questions around the viability of the $3.5 billion pipeline Total's building in East Africa. We'll leave it there for the time being. Elena Casas in London, thank you. Now, Amazon has agreed to buy Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM as it's more commonly known, for nearly $8.5 billion. The movie studio is one of the most iconic in Hollywood, but it gives its e-commerce giant a lot more firepower to compete in the entertainment and streaming industries. It is Tianjian has the details on this acquisition from Los Angeles.
Well, this is considered a watershed moment for both Hollywood as well as the tech industry, for one of the largest, online retail giants like Amazon to be purchasing MGM, also known as Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studio. It's a legacy media corporation, and the price tag itself is pretty significant, with $8.45 billion. Now, this is still subject to regulatory approval, but if cleared, this would be the second largest purchase by Amazon. Back in 2017, it had purchased the national grocery chain Whole Foods for about $13.7 billion. Now, moving forward, this is clearly a new and interesting strategy for Amazon, who's really looking to not just expand its content that is available on its streaming services, the Amazon Prime, but also to essentially ramp up its own production. Now, until now, Amazon already owned its own studios here in the Culver City in Los Angeles, and it already produced several acclaimed shows like The Handmaid's Tale, Fargo, among others. But now they are looking forward to essentially producing more shows, really in an effort to compete with other rivals like Netflix, HBO Max, and Disney, as the competition among studios and streaming services is really becoming stiffer every day. Now, on top of this, we have another major announcement from Amazon. It all happened in that same annual board meeting, the shareholders meeting rather, earlier on Wednesday. We found out that Bezos will be stepping down from his position as the CEO of Amazon. He will be replaced by Andy Jassy, who's currently leading cloud computing at Amazon. And moving forward, he will essentially become the executive chairman at Amazon's board, and he will be taking greater responsibilities in some of the other initiatives he currently has. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Officials in China say they've held constructive talks with the United States over the Phase 1 trade deal between the two sides. China's Vice Premier Liu He spoke with the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai on phone on the 27th of May. This is the first call between representatives of the world's two largest economies on this issue since the Biden administration took office. In the wake of the call, this was the commentary from the spokesperson in China's Commerce Ministry, Gao Feng.
With the attitude of equality and mutual respect, they had a candid, pragmatic, and constructive conversation. Both sides believe that it's important to develop bilateral trade. They also exchanged views on issues of mutual concern and agreed to maintain communication.
Economies around the world continue to rapidly urbanize. Over 55% of the global population now lives in urban areas. In sub-Saharan Africa, that shift is happening twice as fast as it is in Europe, with the size of urban populations forecast to triple by 2050, with several megacities like Lagos and Dar es Salaam around this continent. Tonight on What's Hot, CGTN's Will Kistanyaba finds out what the UK's National Mapping Agency is doing to help African cities respond to the challenges posed by this explosive growth.
The World Bank estimates that more than 50% of sub-Saharan African urban dwellers are living in informal settlements. These dwellings are overcrowded, often polluted, with inadequate housing and limited access to water and sanitation facilities. But as Peter Obon explains, artificial intelligence might be the answer to the world's ever-growing urbanization problem.
The artificial intelligence aspect is actually really important because there are many countries that are using geographic information systems, but much of the data that they're using is out of date. And of course, the challenge of rapid urbanization is that one needs to develop rapid responses to these issues. And the beauty of artificial intelligence is it allows one to deliver this data much, much faster than before. So in the case of Lusaka, anecdotal evidence suggests that they're dealing currently with data that's nearly 20 years out of date. Whereas the data that we've been providing through this pilot is going to be much more relevant because it's more recent and as a consequence of which will be more useful.
Using aerial imagery provided by the Zambian government, Ordnance Survey has utilized its advanced automated process to generate a new base map using artificial intelligence across the capital, Lusaka. With a multitude of use cases, OS mapping data can help identify informal settlements, population and density, as well as the number of built structures. How it works is, computers are taught what to look for in images using training data. The technology then automatically creates mapping quickly and accurately.
So the ability to map individual properties in an informal settlement, then map where the water points are, where the sanitation facilities are, where the transportation infrastructure is, where the pharmacies, the doctors' surgeries and hospitals are, you can very quickly analyse where the gaps are in that infrastructure. And what will that enable the city planners to do is then plug those gaps by understanding where they can put that particular infrastructure to ensure those citizens have access to those services.
If the pilot scheme proves successful, it could be expanded across existing African cities, and with 2/3 of African cities yet to be built and retrofitting infrastructure being 3 times more expensive, experts believe sustainable urbanization can increase prosperity while alleviating high levels of urban poverty.
You know, the ability to understand where your people are, where they live, how they move, how they demand public services, whether it be transport, waste management, energy, it's essential for any city or country to understand that challenge. And if you can bring a map to that challenge, it's going to save that country a lot of money as well, of course, and it's going to help those citizens receive those public services when they need them in a 24-hour/7 context.
With over 55% of the global population now living in urban areas, experts argue that governments need cutting-edge technologies like artificial intelligence to upgrade informal settlements and achieve sustainable urban expansion. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
Quick update from the world of commodities. On a year-to-date basis, cocoa futures are in the red, down by just over 2% at today's prices. WTI crude, on the other hand, has actually gone up by almost 40% in the last 5 months. And the Baker Hughes rig count in the US has gone up by almost a similar margin, up 34.5%. Essentially, that takes us back to where we were around April 2020. But the number of active US oil rigs has actually fallen by over 55% in the last 24 months. Here's what's coming up next. We'll dive into the world of fashion next. Designers are hosting their first show since the COVID-19 outbreak in South Africa.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. One last story for you in the hour. Luxury African fashion is gearing up for a return, especially after all the disruption caused by the pandemic. Some local designers managed to parade their designs in front of a live in-person audience for the first time since South Africa went into a hard lockdown last March. Designers have had to redesign and rethink how they do business as the COVID-19 pandemic rages on. As Julie Shah now reports, designers are betting on a slow but steady recovery.
Africa Day provided an apt setting for the return of luxury fashion to the catwalk. 2020 was a tough year for designers. Shows were brought to a complete halt and clothing sales plummeted. Most designers went online to survive lockdowns in many countries, including South Africa.
As an African child, and then knowing how we grew up, where we come from, becoming resilient, using little from what, the richness content we had. So it felt like it's something that I have been preparing for my whole life. So it was easier to adapt and adjust to the new way of living. So even prior to COVID, I've been trying to become the online brand and just making sure that the presence is known, because I'm telling the African stories.
Creatives kept their spirits up and designs flowing. The hard work has paid off as consumers regain their appetites for more glamorous buys.
Well, I think after COVID, people emotionally are very, very tired, and they just want to indulge into things. They want to enjoy life more. They want to look good now. They want to, and they want to buy. They want to buy. They want to feel that's, because I think they've been deprived throughout all these months of COVID.
Designers are, however, remaining cautiously optimistic about a smooth recovery.
I think it will be going slowly but steady, I would say. The third wave is now here, and there's, there are numbers every day, and there is now the beginning of this paranoia again. Even me, I feel, So we may be slowing down again before going, but I think it's going to be on and off for a little while.
Morocco is the only African country so far to have outpaced Europe and successfully jabbed over 13% of its population. Vaccination rates in most other countries are dismally below 1%.
We need to work together, we need to act together as Africans. And Morocco is a country who is committed to Africa. Africa is building economies. After COVID, this interaction between African people is a very important step towards our ambition, because we need to respond to the expectation of our young generation in Africa and our women. And I think we're going to beat this coronavirus with this vaccination.
Recovery in Africa's fashion industry and other sectors is likely to remain bumpy at least until 2022, unless vaccination programs are significantly boosted to protect against resurgence of the virus. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the program. Another day, another gain for the South African rand at 13.74. The currency is essentially approaching early February 2019 levels after the central bank in Nigeria announced that it ceased using one FX rate, and it will be using the rate used by investors and exporters for government business. The Naira surprisingly weakened on the parallel market as well. In the official market, the dollar Naira rate is 4.11, but the parallel market rate moved by around 10% to 4.95 Naira to the dollar, just under 500. That 20% differential, of course, is still certainly a concern. The top two cryptocurrencies to continue the rise as well, up 3.7% and 2.2% respectively on Bitcoin and Ethereum at 1440 GMT. Over the week, they've gone up by 19.2% and 37.7% respectively. Bitcoin clambering back over that $40,000 mark after crackdowns on mining and trading in China and news of new reporting requirements being considered in the United States. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.